They've been translated, and they tell exciting stories about how gods intermingled with human beings and actually had a hand in the creation of human beings. For decades, thousands of ancient clay tablets discovered in the ruins of Sumer have been studied by historians. Covered with the strange wedge-shaped symbols of cuneiform, they were believed to contain myths, royal records, and ordinary accounts of ancient life. But when scientists recently used powerful artificial intelligence to reanalyze tablets found across Mesopotamia, something unexpected began to emerge. Patterns hidden across different tablets, fragments of sentences repeated, in places thousands of miles apart. Messages that didn't behave like mythology at all. The deeper the AI translated, the stranger the text became. Some passages mentioned mysterious beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki, but the context was different from anything historians had seen before. It was as if the ancient scribes weren't just recording stories. They were trying to preserve a message. But before we reveal what the AI actually uncovered, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Because if the translation is correct, these ancient tablets may contain something far more disturbing than a lost myth. They may contain a warning meant for humanity itself. To understand what the AI found, we first need to understand what these tablets actually are, and why, until now, no one could fully read them. That context is critical, because without it, what we're about to show you won't seem nearly as shocking as it should. For more than a century, archaeologists, uncovering the ruins of ancient Eridu and Nippur, found thousands of Sumerian tablets. Many were broken into fragments. Others sat untouched in museum storage. Rooms untranslated, mislabeled, or simply forgotten. Cuneiform, the world's oldest known writing system, is notoriously difficult to work with. Its symbols shift in meaning depending on context. Many of its words have no modern equivalent, even when the signs were legible. The grammar often made little sense. Generations of scholars spent entire careers translating only fragments. No one managed to piece together a complete picture. And because of that, the world never saw the full story until 2025. That year, machine learning models, trained on thousands of cuneiform inscriptions, were released to research teams. These weren't simple translation tools. They identified missing symbols. They predicted broken endings. They cross-referenced dialects from Akkadian, Babylonian, and Old Sumerian simultaneously. Suddenly, tablets that had been silent for 4 millennia began to speak again, and what they said was nothing like what anyone expected. For years, these texts had been dismissed as poetic creation, myths. But once AI restored and compared them, side by side, hidden details surfaced. The tablets contained records, detailed ones. They described labor systems, classifications of people, and procedures involving blood, clay, and purpose. Some tablets listed these details in repetitive sequences. Others told them in narrative form. But across all of them, the same, consistent patterns appeared. The first shock was the discovery of multiple origin stories. The tablets did not treat humanity as a single invention. They used different terms, each tied to a role, a function, a purpose. They spoke of shaping forms after the likeness of the divine, but dividing them immediately by what they were made to do. Humanity, according to these texts, was not created as one people. It was separated from the very beginning. And one group, described more than once, across completely different tablets, was created with a single defining trait, above all others, obedience. Now, what exactly that means, and what it looked like in practice, is where the story gets deeply uncomfortable. Humans were created, but not as one species. The myth we grew up with was always simple. Gods made man from clay. But the newly decoded tablets tell a far more layered and far more disturbing story. They don't describe one act of creation. They describe stages, trials, failed experiments, and variations. Humans weren't created as a single race. According to these lines, they were prototypes, models. Each batch was tailored to a different purpose with specific physical functions assigned from the start. The tablets also used different terms to describe these early humans. Words that scholars had long assumed simply meant people. But AI flagged critical differences. Some versions used the term Lulu, loosely meaning man. Others used Saggig, which one? Sumeriologists translated decades ago as the black-headed people. That phrase was ignored for years, but AI connected it to a separate passage, describing a group marked for toil, with bodies molded from dark clay and chillingly eyes that do not question. AI also flagged several recurring phrases that stood out. One translates loosely to function-bearing life. Another refers to those who do not multiply. A third, and this one stopped. Researchers cold was clay of lower glow. Scholars had long assumed these were poetic or symbolic. But when AI reconstructed them in full context, a different interpretation emerged. Some researchers now believe these lines describe early humans engineered without the ability to reproduce. If accurate, it would mean they were deliberately designed as a temporary workforce, never intended to survive long enough to pass their traits on. Other tablets describe the gods themselves evaluating each group's performance. One passage talks about the clay of restless voice, a version of man that refused order and was cast into the rivers. Another mentions a group whose limbs were too weak to bear tools, sent back into the mountain to be forgotten. It's hard not to look at this and think of a system, a program that starts with a goal and solves it not by creating equals, but by building specialized tools that look like us. The tablets even describe a specific region called Iden, a flat land between two rivers considered to be a kind of factory floor. Every time a group was made, the gods would test them, name them, and sometimes erase them entirely. None of these patterns were visible before AI could translate the fragments side by side. But now that we can see them together, a disturbing question follows. If the first humans were designed this way, what happened when that design wasn't enough? The genetic modifications that followed. The first humans worked. They obeyed, but they didn't last. They couldn't reproduce. Each one had to be crafted by hand from clay, blood, and divine command. That limitation was built into the design deliberately. It kept the gods in control. But somewhere along the line, that control started to slip. The tablets don't explain exactly why. Some passages suggest rebellion. Others speak of exhaustion. Too many humans dying. Too few being made fast enough. The process simply wasn't sustainable, and so another change was ordered. The tablets describe it plainly. Enki, the god of wisdom, decided to revise the model. What followed, according to the translated text, was described in terms that researchers found striking. A modification. Something added to the design that Enki's brother later discovered and did not approve of. The new version would be smarter, stronger, capable of surviving on its own, and most importantly, capable of reproduction. A new being was created. His name was Adapa. Unlike the others, Adapa wasn't shaped purely for labor. He was described in the texts as chief among men, said to possess divine sight and words that moved the heavens. He could speak, reason, and lead. His mind was sharp enough to understand the god's will and follow it. But even Adapa's wisdom came with built-in limits. He was made to know much, but not all. And when the time came to test that obedience, the results were permanent. According to the Sumerian tablets, the gods were called the Anunnaki. Adapa was summoned before Anu, the sky god, who offered him the food of eternal life. But before he went, Enki had warned him, don't eat, don't drink, refuse everything. So when the moment came, Adapa obeyed. He turned away immortality. And just like that, the chance to free humanity was gone. Whether Enki's warning was a trick or a precaution, the tablets don't say. But the result was clear. Humans would now live, they would grow, but they would also always die. And Adapa's creation marked the start of something even more dangerous. Division, because not everyone received the same upgrade. Some lines of humans remained bound, fixed to labor, unable to think beyond their tasks. Others modeled after Adapa were granted more autonomy. They could learn, adapt, and even lead. That split, barely visible in myth, becomes impossible to ignore when seen through the AI's lens. The roots of inequality, it seems, don't begin with history. They begin with decisions made before history was even recorded, and those decisions were about to cause a war. Anunnaki divisions, control versus freedom. Not all gods agreed on what humans should become. The Sumerian texts don't hide this. They describe a deep disagreement. Whether humanity should stay bound to the task it was created for, or be allowed to grow beyond it. On one side stood Enki, the same god who created Adapa, the one who gave humans reproduction, wisdom, and speech. In some texts, he's even called the father of humanity. His version of creation wasn't perfect, but it was merciful. On the other side stood Enlil. In the vast pantheon of ancient Sumerian deities, Enlil embodied power and authority. The commander of divine order, the master of decrees, and the god who demanded obedience above all else. Where Enki saw potential, Enlil saw chaos waiting to happen. He didn't trust humans. He didn't want them to grow. And he hated what Enki had done. The texts describe Enlil's anger as immediate and absolute. To him, the humans were becoming rebellious. They were breaking the design, disrupting the order. So, the gods began to divide. Some sided with Enki, quietly encouraging the growth of human knowledge. Others stayed loyal to Enlil, calling for restrictions, resets, and punishment. The result was a split, not just in heaven, but on earth. Some humans were guided in dreams, taught the secrets of stars and seeds, given gifts of writing, counting, and metalwork. Others were suppressed, forced back into labor. Their lineages kept simple, silent, and controlled. AI translations show striking differences in how early groups were treated. In one region, humans were described as keepers of the grain and makers of laws. In another, as those without names, workers whose history was erased the moment they were born. At its peak, the conflict reached a breaking point. Enlil, furious that humans had continued to grow in numbers and skill, made a final decision. A great flood. But this, the tablets make clear, wasn't about cleansing the earth. Enlil wanted to destroy humanity entirely. He intended to erase what he saw as a failed project and reset the order. But again, Enki intervened. He found a man and warned him. That man, known in later traditions as Yusudra, Utnapishtim, or Noah, became the final link in the human chain. Enki didn't save everyone. He couldn't. But he saved enough. Enough to carry forward the version of humanity he believed in. The war between the gods didn't end with the flood. It only changed shape. And what came next was perhaps the most unsettling discovery the AI translations produced. Not a story about gods or humans, but something that looked less like mythology and more like a technical record. Advanced technology in the wrong hands. Deep in the tablets, tucked between creation hymns and divine lineages, were lines that didn't read like myths at all. They read like records, logs, descriptions of tools, materials, and systems that made no sense for their time. How could a civilization from 5,000 years ago describe flight? How could they speak of metals reacting to heat in ways that suggest metallurgical knowledge? How could they describe energy so concentrated it turned day into fire? One passage describes vehicles with wings of wood and metal roaring across the sky, guided not by wind, but by fire from within. Another speaks of a liquid metal sealed within a belly of heat moved by pulse and thunder. For years, those phrases were dismissed as poetic. But when read side by side, AI recognized a pattern. Specific components appeared again and again. Wings, heat chambers, propulsion, and concussive force. The text never described these as imagined. They said they were given by the gods not to everyone but to those considered loyal, those who had proven themselves useful. Knowledge, according to the Sumerian tablets, wasn't discovered. It was distributed and then weaponized. AI also flagged a cluster of lines describing a light that burned the earth and left no flesh behind. Another passage described mountains split with fire and cities that vanished in a single day. Mainstream scholars have long read these as metaphors for storms or natural disasters. But some researchers are no longer certain. Some now believe the texts describe technologies we wouldn't see again for thousands of years. Advanced metallurgy, energy projection, and atmospheric flight. And strangely, the knowledge wasn't spread evenly. Some human groups were given these tools, others were deliberately denied them, including notably the ability to even use written language. What kind of civilization hands down advanced knowledge to one group and withholds even basic language from another? The answer, it seems, is a civilization that was structured from the top down with humans placed not at the center, but at the bottom, and even that structure wasn't equal. Some were meant to lead, others to serve. And the ones who questioned it, they disappeared from the record. One line simply reads, "They were shown the mountain, and the mountain did not return them." We don't know what that means, but the pattern it fits into is becoming undeniable. Technology in the ancient world wasn't a miracle. It was a lever used to separate one kind of human from another. And if the tablets are right, that separation was always deliberate. Which brings us to the strangest discovery of all. The warning the Sumerians embedded across centuries of sky records pointing towards something they believed was coming back. The Sumerian warning. The Sumerians weren't just builders, record keepers, or worshippers. They were watchers. That's what the tablets reveal once all the fragments are assembled together. For 7 centuries straight, priests in cities like Ur and Babylon recorded eclipses, planetary alignments, and even the subtle drift of distant stars. All without telescopes, all without modern mathematics. They believed the sky wasn't decoration. It was a message board, and they were expecting something. The name that comes up again and again is Nibiru, described in some interpretations as a celestial body traveling a massive elongated orbit, one that returns approximately every 3,600 years. Ancient scholars once treated it as pure myth. But now, with AI reconstructing the missing lines, researchers have detected something new. References to cycles and long-term patterns with warnings tied not just to Nibiru's return, but to its consequences. The texts don't describe Nibiru as simply a planet. They call it the crossing, the destroyer, and the one who veils the light. And every time it passes, something changes. Not gradually, fundamentally. According to these translations, the return of Nibiru wasn't just destruction, it was a reset. A moment when the existing order was wiped clean and a new one took its place. And every time it happens, humanity forgets. The stories dissolve. Civilizations collapse and are rebuilt from fragments. But one thing the tablets suggest always remains: the split. The idea that some groups were never meant to survive these resets. That the same creators who made humanity in categories may have also designed some of those categories for extinction and others for continuity. The texts describe those chosen by Enki as watchers, guardians who lived in the margins of society, passing down coded stories across generations. The knowledge was never meant for everyone. It was preserved in fragments deliberately scattered, waiting for a time when someone or something could finally reassemble them. And that time, it now appears, is now. Which leads us to the deepest and most unsettling layer of what the AI uncovered. Not just a warning about the future, but a record of how humanity itself was divided at its very foundation. Humanity's forgotten divisions. The Sumerian tablets do not describe humanity as a single unified creation. Instead, they present a picture of people made in separate groups, each designed for a function, for obedience, and for a role. This division was not simply about culture or tribe. It appears to have been something far deeper, embedded at the earliest stages of human existence. The texts never use modern words like race or ethnicity. What they use are classifications, and these classifications are not random. They follow a pattern that repeats itself across dozens of surviving tablet fragments from different regions, yet echoing the same structure. In one passage, a group is called the clay of strength. Another refers to the blood of brightness. A third describes the shadow-formed ones of silent hands. For many years, scholars assumed these were poetic metaphors, but when AI compared hundreds of these lines side by side, the context shifted entirely. The pattern was too deliberate to dismiss. Each group was given assigned traits, assigned duties, and even assigned limits. The clay of strength are described as miners and laborers, responsible for heavy physical work with no mention of leadership roles or language use. The blood of brightness appear in priestly positions responsible for writing, chanting, and tracking the stars. The shadow-formed ones are described as keepers of animals, specifically forbidden from entering temples or handling sacred tools. The texts go further. In some passages, these groups are linked to physical descriptions as well. One speaks of those from the scorched horizon marked by sun and earth. Another describes the pale-dwelling ones born of stone and wind. A third mentions red soil walkers hardened in the land without water. AI's analysis shows the consistent overlap between these descriptions, their assigned duties, and supposed physical features. Taken together, they no longer read as random mythology. They begin to resemble a deliberate taxonomy, categories of people each created for a purpose. Some groups were taught language, others were not. Some were given astronomy, others were warned against looking upward. Some were allowed to have personal names, others were identified only by the tasks they performed. The assignments were not equal. The limits were deliberate. If this system was intentional, and the AI's cross-referencing strongly suggests it was, then its implications are difficult to ignore. The foundation of what we now think of as human division may not be the result of migration, mutation, or chance. It may trace back to a structured system of control that began long before any recorded history. Artificial intelligence did not invent this idea. It only uncovered the patterns that had always been there in the tablets, and those patterns suggest that humanity's divisions did not begin with borders, tribes, or wars. They began with orchestration, with assignments, with deliberate choices made at the very start of human existence, which brings us to the question that no one working on this project can quite escape. If these records are real, if these patterns are deliberate, why are we only seeing this now? And what were we supposed to do with it? The AI era begins. We were never supposed to see the full story. For thousands of years, the tablets sat half buried in ruins. Those who found them couldn't read them. Those who read them couldn't finish them. And those who finished them could never put the pieces together, not until now. But who was this information meant for? Why was it buried? And why, after thousands of years, is it resurfacing in the age of artificial intelligence? Some researchers maintain this is all myth, that the stories were always symbolic, that the gods never existed, and that the lines about roles and races are simply ancient metaphors for power structures. Others are not so sure. Because when you line the myth against the archaeology, and you compare the descriptions to migrations, bloodlines, and the inexplicable jumps in early human development, the match is unsettling. This isn't really a question about whether Enki and Enlil were real beings. It's a question about whether something or someone structured the origin of our species with a specific end goal in mind. What started as a scientific application of AI to ancient text turned into something much harder to categorize, a mirror held up to humanity itself. The Sumerians didn't just leave behind clay and symbols. They left a record of control, a history of division, and a warning that was almost missed, buried in fragments across thousands of miles and thousands of years, waiting for a technology that didn't yet exist to finally assemble it. We now have that technology, and for the first time, we can read the record as a whole. What it tells us is that the hands that shaped the first of us may have never intended for all of us to be equal. That some were built to lead, some to serve, and some to be forgotten entirely. So, the question now isn't just what happened. The question is, which version of humanity are we? And what do we do with that answer? If you've made it this far, drop a comment below with what part shocked you most. And if this is the kind of content you want more of, ancient mysteries, scientific breakthroughs, and the history they don't teach in schools, then subscribe and hit the bell. Because there's a lot more where this came from.